Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melisa Liberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Welcome to this week's episode of the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. This is Melisa Liberman, and today I am thrilled to welcome John Healy to the podcast. I invited John to come on because he has such a unique perspective to bring to the table. We just finished up our conversation, and I'm really excited for you to hear it. The reason why John has a unique perspective is because of the type of work that he's been doing over the last 20 plus years, I think almost 30 years in the industry, from the sense of right now he's a fractional executive. So he's an independent consultant like we are. The type of consulting he does is helping organizations as a fractional executive to build out their overall workforce strategies. And that means a lot of different things depending on the client. So you'll hear him talking about the different types of examples. So he works in this space specifically as an expert. And then in terms of his corporate career, why I think it's so unique and his perspective is so unique is that when he was in corporate, he worked at Kelly Services, which is not only a staffing firm, but also an MSP in the sense of them being an intermediary between a business, an enterprise, and its staffing suppliers, its independent contractors, the consultancies that it leverages. And so he has such a unique perspective to bring to the table in the sense that he's been a buyer of consulting services. He's been a buyer and helping enterprise clients to buy consulting and contract services. So it's really a 360-degree view that he brings to the table. And I'm excited for you to hear our conversation. So without further adu, let's dive in. I am so thrilled to welcome you, John, here to the podcast today. We met ages ago, or at least I knew of you from my time in corporate, or your time in corporate maybe, when I was on the executive team at IQ Navigator, which is now Beeline. So we've known of each other for a long time. And in the last couple of years, it's been so fun to get to know you even better as part of different groups of consultants, independent consultants and platform owners and that kind of thing. So I was so excited that you agreed to come on the podcast today because you've had such success as an independent consultant. And I know that I'm excited to hear the lessons learned and advice that you have to share to the independent consultants who listen to this podcast. So with that, I would love to see if you might introduce yourself.
Okay, so by way of introduction, I'm John Healy, obviously. That's the easy part of things. I operate as a fractional executive today. So I spent 30 plus years in the workforce solutions industry. The bulk of it was with Kelly Services. I left there running the Office of the Future of Work. And that was about 4 years ago that I left. And since that point in time, I've had the freedom and flexibility to put my time and energy focused on whether it's organizations or it's governments or it's service providers who believe that we need to radically transform the way that we connect people with work. And to have the freedom to work on the projects and with the people that I think are really there to make a difference, not just to make a profit, it has been something that's really important to me. And obviously, you'd love to have both of those things come into play, but I'm going to choose purpose over profit for my priorities.
Yeah. John, what's your goal for your business?
It is about purpose. It's genuinely about radically transforming the way people connect with work. I believe, my time working within the space, from seeing how clients, and particularly the end user client, not the purchasing folks or the HR teams that are often procuring the services, but how the end users struggle with things, to talk to the workforce that's in the market and to hear their struggles on some of the things that are going on, whether it's the way AI is changing some of the things now or just outdated processes that are used. It tells me that there are better ways to do things. And so My goals for my business are not necessarily tied to financial outcomes. There are certain ones that I have that I need to achieve, and I need to meet those goals on a regular basis, and they're laid out. I'll give a little plug for your little program for laying things out. Unless I think you've done a really good job of giving small businesses a clean pathway to set their own goals and to work through things. But it's far more about the purpose than it is anything else for me.
Yeah. What do you think the measurement is? How do you know that you're successful as you're going through and choosing which clients to work with and which clients not to work with, and kind of what that looks like for you?
Yeah, the clarity and trust is really important up in the beginning. Like, do we have clarity of purpose of what we're trying to accomplish and what's there?
Mm,
And that gets really fun when you think about categories that really haven't been pursued a lot. Like, how do you introduce crowdsourcing into an organization? How do you make a difference with people in thinking about that? How do you get people's mindset shift to go from one that's focused on scarcity to one that's focused on abundance? That's a difficult thing to measure. And so I kind of have a rating system that I use for everyone that I engage. Is it purely objective? Heck no. Would you measure and rate everyone the same way that I do? No. But it's something that allows me to look down and evaluate my clients. I think one of the things you talk about is having a baseline and
mm,
then measuring against the baseline. Well, I have a baseline for projects throughout my career that have made a difference for the people that were at the outcome level of those projects, but also projects that made me feel good about myself. And so it's what did I do, but also what did I learn?
mm.
I have a criteria that I require for any engagement is that there's something I'm going to learn.
Yeah.
Like, am I going into something new? So one of the teams that I do a lot of work with, they specifically help companies set up global capability centers in India. I personally believe you can't be a technology centric company and not have an India strategy. It's the only place left on the planet where the demographics are really working in the favor of having access to the talent that you need. So there is opportunity for abundance that's there. The capabilities within the market have radically shifted over the 15 years that I've done work in India. But you capture that and I say, okay, setting up a global capability center, that's something different. It's something I didn't have a lot of experience and I wanted to understand more and more of. And I think it's changing. So it's moving from the large corporate enterprise to small and mid-sized businesses are doing that. Wait a minute, freelancers are getting engaged into that marketplace. It's a completely different cultural norm.
Mm,
The rise of IPOs that's happening inside the India marketplace, pretty dramatic. Okay, that's intriguing to me to learn. So one of those tangible measures that I look at on every project is what am I going to learn? What things am I going to be able to explore that I didn't have an opportunity to spend a lot of time in? But by taking this project or this client on, it's going to give me an opportunity to learn. And I'm very transparent with my clients about that as well to say, hey, I'm going to be asking you a lot of questions. This is a new area. This is what
mm.
I'm going to bring to you where I feel I can deliver value. But this is what I want to learn from you in the process and how we both get value out of the engagement. So I think that's a big part of it.
I think that transparency is something that consultants sometimes have a challenge with, because sometimes we think we need to know everything or be the expert in everything. But to set that up front kind of gives permission for everyone to admit that's not the case.
It's one of the biggest flaws, in my opinion, in the market right now. There is a tendency, and I understand the why, for people to say, yes, I can do that.
Mm,
And it's not just a professional services consultant, it's not just in the HR or the digital marketing or whatever it is. Business entities like to say, yes, we can do that. The software companies say, yes, our product will do that. Like that's the
yeah.
default that people go to, but you end up getting caught when that doesn't work out well. And to me, being an independent, one of the big learnings I had as I went through it was to gain a respect and appreciation for all that existed inside the corporate organization that I was part of. Oh, that digital marketing team and what they did, and that sales team that was bringing
Mm,
clients in the door and what they were doing. Oh, and the legal team and the risk management team and what they were bringing in, and oh, HR teams that could help. All of these different resources that, okay, now I'm doing all of those roles, but wait a minute, do I need to do those roles? And that's like
yeah.
there's this acceptance that all of this other stuff goes on to make a business run efficiently. And that's really important to understand. Then it's okay, what's the best way for me to get that done in the new world? Is it associations that I join up with that have peer groups that you can access some things in? Or is it through a set of partnerships? Is it truly using freelancers along the
Yeah.
way to get things done? That's part of what I believe in is that if I'm going to be an advocate for the open talent market and the open talent economy, then I need to actually live it and experience it and do it. And then you can start making some things happen. So it's a very fun and intriguing time in the market.
Yeah. When you introduce yourself as a fractional executive. I'm curious, sometimes there's confusion between what's a fractional versus an independent or a consultant. And I'm curious how you think about that, John.
So for me, a fractional is in essence a part-time role
Yeah.
where you have accountability for what's there. So I think of consulting as often I've got a short-term deliverable and I hand something over and then it's my effort is done and it's now up to my client to continue on. And there's good opportunities. I think those things can happen. There are projects that have a start date and an end date. But my first role, when I left Kelly, they asked me to stay on and represent them on a board. And I did that for a 3-year stretch, and it accounted for roughly 1 day a week.
Hmm.
Okay? I had reporting accountability into their organization. I need to make sure that what was going on inside this board was communicated to the group. I needed to gather the feedback. I needed to actively and appropriately represent their interests as we went through things and then communicate back in. So I had accountability for what happened, but it didn't require a 40-hour week.
Hmm.
I have been the interim CHRO for an organization. And it wasn't because, I guess the circumstance, best way to put it is they had someone who was ready to climb into the role, but needed some more seasoning. So rather than pushing them into something before they were ready, we established a clear set of goals. And over a 3-year period, it was my responsibility to ensure that this person had developed the capabilities to move into the role so that she could take that on and I could step away. So there was a recognition of what was there. But when decisions needed to be made, when there were board meetings that the CHRO needed to be in, that was me.
Right.
But it was a half a day a week is how much they needed me. And so for a lot of the work that I do is more on the strategy side, a lot of that I found didn't need to be a full-time job. And candidly, in doing work for multiple companies simultaneously, I think my learning and the diversity of my opinions is stronger than when I was in a single role with a single set of focused areas. So to me, the fractional is about working for multiple organizations simultaneously in roles that don't require dedicated 40-hour a week or full time equivalent time and attention.
Yeah. Tell me, when you think back to I think you said 4 years, you've been doing this for 4 years.
Yep.
Tell us, what has been the biggest lesson learned that you've had in those last 4 years?
I think it goes back to two things that I've referenced a little bit. One was respect and appreciate all that you had when you were part of a larger organization, just that recognition that things are different. And that even includes the consistency of a paycheck
Yeah.
versus, the inconsistency that comes when you're operating your own business. So I think that's a learning and something that I encourage everyone to kind of take the time on. And the other is about focus and being clear on kind of having that benchmark of what you will and won't accept. Like one for me, and I don't mean to be crude with it, but I saw too many people in my career who were in the industry and then came running back and were, "Hey, John, can I sell you something?"
Yeah.
And it felt like a lot of people were pimping their Rolodex,
Mm.
is the way I put it. And that just felt dirty to me. I witnessed it too many times. And so as I thought about taking roles, I talked to a couple of people who I consider mentors and asked, how did you manage that? And I think that was a really important piece for me was to feel that I had integrity in what I was doing and wasn't just kind of trying to make money off of my past. That it just seems dirty and not something I'm interested in.
Yeah. So let's take that to another layer of detail. So, what did that look like for you when you were thinking about client acquisition and how you approached it and how you did it in such a way that didn't feel salesy or that you were pimping your Rolodex?
You can't say it isn't salesy
Yeah.
because there is a sales element of developing any new relationship, period. Whether you like to acknowledge that or not, that's a part of what's there. But it was, as an example, if I was asked to be a board advisor for a variety of different startups,
Mm.
and I can be good about that. But if the relationship became one about, well, who are the 10 customers you can introduce me to this week? As opposed to how do you help my product get better? How do you help me think about my digital marketing campaign? Okay, now I start. Okay, so all you really want the relationship with is so that I can introduce you to 10 other people, which tells me that the relationship's going to be done as soon as there's something that's over. It's also, if you're working with people that you think are doing something truly transformational, and that was kind of the guideline for me to enter in, often their business isn't ready for some of the people that I work with. So many of the relationships and clients I have are from large enterprises. Many of them are risk averse organizations that don't want to be on the leading or bleeding edge of something new. They want to see something established and work through. So, some of the relationships I have, it's not appropriate to introduce people to. Others, very appropriate
Yeah.
to introduce. So it was about where was my comfort level in that, and if the hair went up in the back of my neck and you felt uncomfortable, you know what squishy feels like.
Yeah.
And you say no. And you get squishy a couple times, then you need to say, okay, this isn't the right kind of relationship. So it's something I just stay really conscious of.
Yeah. And when you first started out, tell us a little bit about where did your clients come from, John? And then how has that evolved over time?
My clients came from, my first from my employer.
Yeah.
The company I worked for 27 years signed me on to the first project that I was tied to. And then it's been my network. So my network constantly, and it's been about constantly developing my network and
Mm.
expanding it. So again, much of my career was focused on the temporary staffing industry. One of the things I got really intrigued with when I stepped out of Kelly was the crowdsourcing marketplace. Well, that's something that the temporary staffing industry really doesn't do anything in. If you think of the VMS tools or the MSPs, crowdsourcing is not an element that's brought in. So my network wasn't going to help me there. But there are some people that are really smart in the area that I was able to build relationships with and understand and get to know those relationships, and going into them with that learning mode and the transparency mode and the sharing mode is what's led to most of the projects that have come back. I am happy to, people ask if can I introduce you to someone or will you have an introductory conversation? I'm always intrigued by that. There's just a raw curiosity that I
Mhm.
have if people are really wanting to make a difference. Like if you're going to go start your own business, invest your capital, invest your time into doing something different, and you think you're going to change the world as part of it, which I think every entrepreneur feels, why would you not want to talk to that person? I get confused by the number of people who think, no, 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 my time's too precious. So I love having those conversations, learning,
Yeah.
sharing, and then often two-way exchange ends up developing. And over time, then all of a sudden there's a question, well, could you help me with this? And would you be willing to look at that? And now all of a sudden we're exploring. And whether I initiate that or they initiate that, I think if I look at all of the different engagements that I have today or have had over the last 4 years, I think they've all come either through direct or indirect relationships that I've invested time and energy into because there was shared value in the dialogue that took place.
I really want to underscore what you just said because I think so often we think we need to be really smart business owners. And when we're a smart business owner, we should use, to your point, we should use our time very efficiently and effectively and be very constrained. And what stands out to me with what you said, John, which I think is one of, if I could say, you're one of the secret sauces that I noticed just, thinking about you and your business is that willingness to get to know people without some agenda, this willingness to have conversations because it's driven from curiosity and the intrigue that you just shared versus wanting to have some kind of formula of where this is going to, or guarantee where it might lead. And so I think that is such a valuable lesson that you're sharing for other consultants, that we don't have to know where something's going to go if we're approaching it through that intrigue that you're describing and the curiosity. Some things will go places, some won't, but at the end of the day, knowing that it all leads in the same direction can be a really valuable way to approach this.
And you've got to be open to testing some different things.
Right.
Like if I look within our industry, I find an awful lot of people spend their time with staffing industry analysts. I love the people there. I think they do a really good job. I think that they've obviously brought the industry together in ways no one else has. Okay. Full respect. But if that's the only place you're going, it's also why you hear a lot of the conversations that, oh, it's the same dialogue with the same people year after year. So are you going out and spending your time with a group like Hacking HR that Enrique Rubio started? And all of a sudden, you're encountering people from different
Mm,
countries and different cultures and different size organizations who are looking at their workforce in a very different way. Oh, okay, you've got that. Or one of the things that I'm really intrigued with right now is this a few people that have written on this on organizational debt and kind of the legacy debt so many companies have. So you come out of a software company,
yeah.
and so I'm sure you can relate to that one part of the system that's stuck somewhere in the back corner that Doug Levy's still the only person who knows how to program that, and no one can touch that. Otherwise, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
That stuff exists across all organizations. That's a technical debt that companies have. You have cultural debt when the mindset of an organization isn't aligned in the leadership and walking through things. Okay, so if you start getting intrigued with this topic, okay, well, Mimi Brooks is someone that I was introduced to who wrote a white paper on it, fascinating ideas of what was there. Okay, so I got her piece. HFS, an advisory firm led by Phil First, did a study on it and published some information. And okay, so are you going out? Are you having the conversation with Mimi? Are you going out? Are you going to an HFS event instead of that SIA event
Mm,
this year to cultivate and develop some relationships there and maybe be a slightly different voice than that audience has heard and be in a different category? So, back to that baseline, these events, what do I get out of them? What do I expect going in? What do I get out of them?
yeah.
Well, I'm not getting as much as I once got. Do I need to do it every year, or do I turn that into a every other year or every third year event that I'm going to, and start readjusting and recalibrating to figure out which areas of relationships and which activities are yielding the best returns? Those are all elements that become important to keep track of,
Yeah.
so that you can feel good about changing decisions and being conscious about why I'm not doing A and I'm going to do B instead.
Yeah, I love the way you're thinking about this and approaching it, John, so holistically. Thinking about ahead, to your point of what am I going to invest in this year with my time and my dollars, my business owner dollars. And one of the component, a lot of times we think about is this going to fill my pipeline with anything? Or is this, how many leads should I walk away from this with? And well, that's important. The intangibles that you're just describing are also so important. How does this help me expand my perspective? How does this help me continue to learn and be a student of my profession? And how does this expand my network that might, may or may not grow into something in the future? And recognizing those more intangibles in addition to the maybe the hard and fast pipeline metrics is really valuable.
Very important. It's also, it asked a question earlier about learnings,
Yeah.
allocating the time for it. So back to being fractional, often kind of the most common unit of time that I am engaged on is a half a day a week in projects. I won't sell more than 3.5 days a week because I need to have the other day and a half for learning
Yeah.
and learning in life, if you will. I think as we got started, I've got a new grandbaby. She's going to get time. And that's an important element to me. So that's going to be there. And I'm going to make sure that I have time available to do things with her. So, you know, being conscious of what does it take, not just to bring the income in, but to do the things that will lead to the next wave of opportunity and the personal satisfaction and growth that you're after.
Yeah, absolutely. I love thinking about it that way of I even think about my family as one of my clients. My business is a client, my family is a client, and then making sure that I've got really adequate time to support all of those clients, including my consultant clients, rather than sort of thinking about it in these distinct buckets.
Yep.
John, tell us if you're willing to share, what do you think of the biggest mistake has been as you've been running your business for the last 4 years?
The biggest downtimes or the biggest mistakes will come from a lack of a plan of what you're trying to do. Just kind of winging it. Oh, it'll just happen. Making the assumption that things will happen is probably the biggest risk factor. And when I look at when things aren't happening that I want, I kind of pause and say, okay, when was the last time you revisited the plan and reassessed what was there? So, doing that annual planning process, but then checking back in on it to make
Yeah.
sure you know where are you against it, have things changed and be willing to adapt it and work through that. I think the other is just losing focus on what you're doing. It can become very easy to say, I want to hang on to a client because there's a revenue stream. But if the work is not right and if it's not satisfying, and if for you, you probably aren't satisfying for them either. So having those conversations to say, okay, what's right? And I can think of two individual clients that I probably hung on to too long. And in the end, there was a lot of effort to ensure that I don't damage the relationship that was built, because I think that there is opportunity to re-engage with people down the
Yeah.
road, but probably let it go on too long.
Would you be willing to share with us tactically how you, as thinking about the work that you do as a fractional executive, what does that look like in terms of what the duration looks like? And when you revisit the conversation about, is this working? Is this mutually beneficial? What does that look like tactically, John?
They range. We have to start with understanding the problem.
Yeah.
What's the business problem you're trying to solve? And so there has to be some kind of an ongoing need. So if it's in the most typical, it's around the strategy of someone's workforce and what they're doing and how they're trying to bring together all of the different parts of their workforce to look at things differently. How do we accomplish work in a different way? It gets down to a question of the executive leadership. Do they have a mindset for it? Does their leadership team have a mindset for it? And is their frontline experiencing pain that we can actually solve for? So as we start to understand those elements, now it's crafting out a project plan that says, what do we want to accomplish? And what gets interesting is sometimes there are tangible things that we can get into. We can solve for these things that we're going to merge these two elements, or that we're going to use a common skills taxonomy
Mm.
across our full-time employees and our contingent employees, and start learning how to measure the effectiveness of the two groups in parallel. Or we're going to begin to use third-party data sets to start understanding supply and demand information around labor. Okay, so we can get into some tangible elements that need to be deployed, that need to be accessible across the enterprise, establish timelines of what that's going to be. That starts putting together a project plan. That forms a statement of work. There's usually an element that we craft in of some flexibility for uh-oh moments, or we didn't see that one coming and this needs to be done. So I personally do not sign up for hourly projects.
Yeah.
That's a decision I've made because I care more about the outcome than the tracking the number of hours. And I think it gets very interesting when you start saying hours. Okay, do we include the preparation work? Do we include the meetings themselves? Do we include the follow up? What about the reading time and the research that goes into thinking about something and going through it? I find that to be an area that can create a lot of consternation between a client and a provider unless you're doing very tangible, measurable hourly activity. So I tend to put things out in the units of a half a day a week.
Yeah.
And how many units do you want to consume and for how long? My projects will usually run on a 12-month period with an open ended renewal cycle. But I've also had things go for a defined 3-year period because we said at the end of this term, this is what we expect to be done.
Yeah.
So it's about understanding what we need to accomplish with the client and then getting that documented out in a way that we both feel comfortable that that's realistic to achieve. We just craft that into an agreement that we can both live with, or I've had some companies say, I don't like the word retainer.
Hmm.
Okay, so we've got to craft different language to get people comfortable instead of using that. But all comes down to each client and just being realistic and straightforward with people. They know
Yeah.
how their organization is willing to buy and what they're willing to accept and not accept. I know what I'm willing to accept and not accept. Okay, let's put some cards on the table and walk through it. And if I can make it happen easily and it costs me a nickel for a more efficient process and one that both parties feel good about, I'm okay with that.
Yeah. It's that relationship up front and being able to create the trust that it sounds like through the process to be able to have that conversation and think 3 or 4 steps ahead about how are we going to get this through the approval process. Who's the blocker? What are the words? Like you said, retainer, let's change that to a different word if we need to when it's the same, ultimately the same outcome.
Yeah. And there's always something you can negotiate differently. If someone needs to be within a certain budget to get something done, and that's a little less than you think that the project deserves, okay, what can I get in addition to the cash payment? Okay. If it's a small firm, maybe it's an equity deal that
Hmm.
you're looking at and you're getting some options there. If it's a large enterprise and that's not a viable, for a commercially traded organization, that's not a viable way to approach things. And maybe it's a reference letter
Yeah.
that's there. Or maybe it's a set of introductions that they can create to people. So I think you just have to be willing to think creatively as to, okay, how's this of shared value? And there's a lot of different ways value can be created.
Yeah, absolutely. John, tell us, I want to start talking with you about being on the client side and how you've thought about engaging consultants over the course of your career. But before we do that, let's wrap up this segment talking about advice that you might give to other consultants that are wanting to grow their businesses. Anything else we haven't touched on as you think about all of those consultants and where they get stuck? And what 1 or 2 things might you suggest to them to help them be more successful in the goals that they've got for their businesses?
Maybe the piece that we haven't covered on is making sure that what you bring to the table is of value to the market.
Mm,
Just because I spent a lot of years doing this in my career doesn't necessarily mean it's of direct value or that you may need to be part of a bigger group. So I just finished a project where the client was looking for someone on the strategy side, but then post strategy, they also needed to make sure that there was going to be an implementation. So as I heard their issue, I said, I'm not going to bid this directly. I'm going to do it through a consortium that I'm a part of. And we're going to come in as a group because once I get through with my piece, you're going to need someone to do this stuff. And so, what I'd rather do is have us both engaged.
right.
I'll do this part, they'll do this part that's going to be a bridge. And then, as you're ready to move forward, you can engage them into the next piece. And all of a sudden, there was that aha. So, the willingness to recognize that maybe this is bigger than the part I do
You're right.
where I tend to get very, very frustrated. And it happens even like with some of the companies that are in the marketplace. So this may turn to our segue here. I think there are a lot of organizations and products that do really well with a thing,
Mhm.
but that thing is connected to 10 other things. And if you don't understand what the consequences are to those other elements, you can really create some unintended problems for organizations. I think the same thing as you go in to do a project, if you do one piece really well, if you're a data analyst, who's bringing the data to the table? What's being done with the data at the end of it? What is the data strategy for the parent organization, not for the project, but for the parent organization? If those pieces don't align, then you can have some really good work that's caught in a little spot that no one else can use. And that's where money gets wasted. Back to organizational debt,
Right.
that's where you have a ton of independent projects that don't fit together that are creating, gaps between each other and costing companies a lot. So that idea of understanding the interdependencies of the work you're doing
Yeah.
and the organization and what else is around it, workforce ecosystems is where I spend a lot of my time. Understanding all the players who are there and are part of that and being able to leverage your way through that becomes to me a really important element of helping your client solve a problem, not just fix a symptom, but to solve a problem.
Yeah, it helps to evolve from being maybe an order taker they ask for this, you do this, versus more an advisor, a helping them to see what they're missing, where their blind spots are, what the bigger picture could look like, and bringing those experts to the table.
And a client from Singapore referred to me as their Sherpa.
I love it.
And that was the greatest compliment that has been paid to me, that he said, I had to trust you. I was doing something I had never done before.
Yeah.
I had researched it. I was confident, but I knew you had been through this, and I knew I could trust you to take me through to where I needed to be so that I could achieve my goal.
Right.
And that made me feel exceptional.
That's phenomenal. We'll have to use that in the title of this episode for sure. How to become the client's Sherpa. That's fantastic. While we have you here, John, one of the things you bring to the table is the wealth of experience also on the buyer side, engaging consultants and helping enterprise clients to engage consultants and contractors and independents. And so I would love to explore that side of the equation with you, because I think it's so valuable to always be in the mind of the buyer. Like you're describing, what is the value? What is the end result they're looking for? Why are they looking for that? Not just what is it that they need. So maybe first, could you just describe a little, you touched on it in your introduction, but give us a little bit of a context here of what your experience has, looked like when you were back in corporate engaging consultants or helping other enterprises engage consultants and contractors.
Yeah, I think my first real foray into that was at Kelly. We were operating in, I think it was roughly 30 countries at the time, and the MSP business was taking off. And the challenge that was presented by our CEO was, Manpower, Adecco, and Randstad, the three behemoths in the industry, operate in 120 countries. How do we compete with that?
Mm.
And we decided that we were going to build out a supply chain model and follow true supply chain methodology and come up with the 10 best suppliers in each labor category in all 120 countries instead of thinking we could do it all for anyone. And so we ended up building a network of 4,600 suppliers around the world. Well, that taught me to learn an awful lot about what people do, what the expectations and the needs were of people, but also how to evaluate
Mm.
their business and what they can do. So, yeah, I spent a lot of time building relationships and fostering that and understanding it. And then with clients, it was, recognize why did they have the supplier base that they did, or at one point I was seconded out to work for one of our clients and redesign their services procurement organization. So have been in the spot where I was in the buying role on a lot of cases. I think there are a couple things that I would really push towards. One is you got to meet people where they are. We've all heard that. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, in labor areas, in workforce areas, for the last 20 plus years, companies have been doing two things consistently. They have been centralizing and standardizing everything that they can. And out of that, you get two significant points of value. You get value for money spent. If I buy 1,000 units of something, that's cheaper than if I buy one unit 1,000 times. It's just simple macroeconomics. The other is risk mitigation. If you do a process consistently and you drive everyone through that same channel, the odds of it getting you in trouble are a whole lot lower than if you let everyone do it their own way. And so organizations have been doing that. Well, then along came this concept of human centric design, which was okay, make sure we do what's right for the people at either end. Well, often that was in conflict
Mm.
with what the central administrator needed done. So, where are the balance points around that? Where is an organization? Where is their risk profile? What are they tolerant of, and what are they not tolerant of in going through it? And trying to understand that becomes really important. And I find most organizations are willing to share that side of things if you can build the trust and have open and transparent conversations. The other, and I'll give someone from our industry, I was doing a research project that we're getting ready to publish at the end of the first quarter of this
Mm.
year. Jason Ezrati from Brightfield Strategies was the one who shared with me as we were talking about the complexity of an implementation and some things that just what they've noticed and what they've gone through. And I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have his exact words here, but the thing that Jason shared that I thought was really powerful was that what he really focuses on is making sure that he delivers services to the person who's going to use the service, not to the person who buys the service.
Mm,
And I think it's very easy to get caught with meeting my procurement metric or my HR metric. But if in the end, the effectiveness of the solution is dependent on an end user utilizing and the adoption that you're after in this, you got to make sure that the work you're trying to do and the way that you're measuring the effectiveness and the questions that you're asking are really driven towards what those end users need to get accomplished. Because that, in the end, any service organization, HR, procurement,
mhm.
legal, finance, they're service functions to a business. So they're trying to make the business run more effectively, more profitably, more risk tolerant, whatever it is. But in the end, the business needs to execute the work. So making sure we understand what it's going to take to enable that work to happen and the outcomes to be achieved from the perspective of the end user, I find that to be maybe the most important and the most frequently overlooked element
Mm.
when people come in and they're focused on getting their sale in the door is they forget who we're actually delivering services to.
Yeah. And the flip side can be true too. When more focus is put on those end users, it ends up making the buyer, HR, procurement, whoever it is, more look better in the end.
Mhm.
So it can be a win win. It doesn't have to be either at one's expense.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be confrontational. And you know what? In the end, the person responsible for the buying is going to be held to their metrics, and we need to account for that. So I'm not saying ignore them, but make sure that you've got the other piece of it taken care of.
Yeah, absolutely. John, what have you seen in the last, as you've seen the space change from contractor, enterprise clients, and even small and medium sized and startup companies engaging consultants? How have you seen that change over the course of the time you've been working on it? And what do you think it looks like going forward? A big question.
Well, it's a big question, but I'll give you what I think is necessary. And this is where what I spend my time hunting for. I think we have an abject failure in the market of developing truly breakthrough products. When robotic process automation first came around, really cool ideas that came up. But if you had a really bad process
Mm.
and you automated it, you produced really bad things a whole lot faster. That's not really good for us. So,
Yeah.
people started learning, okay, wait a minute, we need to make sure that the process is going to get us what we want as an outcome. Then we can go through. And so there was a learning there. I find, for it to take 18 months to implement an HRIS system or a VMS technology or a freelance management system is asinine in my book.
Yeah.
It's really, really crazy. This is about simple workflow for people trying to get stuff done. And if you think of, what are true breakthrough products that have happened in the software as a service business, the measurement is on how many months does it take to get 1 million users per month going through it. And I think if you look at the last 10 companies that have gotten there, it was like Google Translate was one of the early ones on that. And it took them 70 months to get there. And that was an oh, wow. ChatGPT, 3 weeks.
Right. Oh, it's crazy.
Okay. But if you look at all the products that are on that, unicorn list, if you will,
Yeah.
they're all intuitive. Why did we all jump to ChatGPT or any of these large language models? They're really easy to use and they're intuitive to get there and move through things. So I think we're in this stage where we're going to be moving away from the graphical user interface. So what does the screen look like into a voice interface? And the expectations that we have as consumers have changed. You expect things to work much more efficiently in your life. So why do you still tolerate bad things in your work? I think we need to see more companies. I'm fine with if you're going to use an MVP. I'd like at Google, they refer to it as MLP instead, most lovable product. It's lovable, I want to use,
Yeah.
not minimum viable.
A good perspective shift. Yeah.
Get me to something that I like to use, and then let me see what else can happen. Mercer has a piece that they talk about the different architectures. I spent a lot of time with them on HR technology and systems architecture and how you have to look at things and go through. And one of the examples that they break your architecture into three different types. And one of them that is least often used is the experience architecture. And the example that they cite is Amazon. So Amazon's objective when you or I want to buy a book is 2 clicks, 2 clicks to buy a book. Your experience from a GUI perspective on the screen, it's not a real pretty thing that you're looking at. You see the picture of the book, you get your, okay, are you a Prime member? Yep, I got that. And so I can click my in, boom, boom, done. It touches 70 different systems for that to happen in 2 clicks. And they've made that all invisible to you and me in our experience.
Yeah.
I find it awful that to hire a full time employee or to get the help I need to get work done in my company takes 18 months to implement and has an experience that is awful for the end user when all these other things can happen in a much better way. So I believe what we have to look for is partners who are committed more than just to an MVP and to get to a stage that I can exit as an owner if I'm a
Hmm.
small startup, or that I can get acquired by someone else, or what's your commitment to evolving your product and going through it? Is there a roadmap? Is there a thought? Yes, some people aren't going to have it all done in the first wave or where they are, but you should be able to talk to people about where you're going and get a sense that someone's committed to more than just minimum and viable.
Yeah.
Get me to something that's truly breakthrough, and now I can get excited. So that to me is, if I'm in a buying stage, if I'm in a partnering stage right now, because I think more and more it's about ecosystems and partners, I am looking for people who believe that there is something better that can be done and that are committed to finding their way to see where that can happen and what it's going to take for it to happen.
Yeah. And as you think about those buying organizations who are wanting to engage consultants, John, whether it's through a platform like we were just talking about or directly, what are your thoughts about what the trends have looked like in terms of just willingness to bring on consultants compared to the past? And for those of us as independent consultants or fractionals that only need a handful of clients in a given year, what would advice would you say from a buyer's perspective would help them get their foot in the door?
I think you have to understand who you're trying to sell to, who your audience is. If I'm working with the corporate procurement function of a global 2000 company, it's going to be complex.
Yeah.
Period. It's not going to be real simple. So I'm looking for a coach who's going to help me through there. So if someone wants to use my services, who can you connect me with that can help me through this process? I know I've got to go through the gauntlet. I know it's going to be painful.
Yeah.
Who have you taken through this that can let me know what I need to worry about? Your indemnification language is going to be tough. The insurance that they're going to ask for is going to be difficult. The speed at which contracts get executed is going to be slower. So understand what you're walking into. If that's back to respect, the things that were done for you in the past. If you were part of those contract negotiations, you know what to expect from a large enterprise. If you're going into a smaller organization, do you have your templates ready to go? How can I make it easy for you? I just saw someone coaching right now who's building a business, and they were sharing with me their back and forth exchange with their client. And it's a proposal going back and forth. And I said, why stop it and put it into a statement of work?
Right.
You know what the statement of work has to look like. You've already got the MSA with them. You've already done one statement of work. You know it was there. Draft it into that statement of work. Make it easier for them to buy.
Yeah.
And I think that becomes really important. And it's easy to think, okay, I got to make it easy for people to do business with me, right? Okay, what does that mean? And it means different things for different organizations. Large enterprises, who's your admin that I can work with? Who's going to help me navigate my way through this? You don't need to hear all of the nuts and bolts of what goes on with it. But if there's someone in your team who can just guide me to the right people as I'm going through, great. Who can coach me with it? Great. We'll do that. Like, make it easy for people on that front, or draft the statement of work so that people can get through. Whose paper do you want this agreement to be on?
Yeah.
Is it going to be easier to go through on your paper, or is it going to be easier to get done on my paper? And you know what? Asking about the NDA at the beginning will probably tell you whose paper you're going to operate on the rest of the way through.
That's right. Yeah.
So I think sometimes people get caught in this is my process and what I'm going to do. You probably need to have a few different processes if you're working with multiple types of companies. If you're working with startups and if you're working with large enterprises, it's going to be a different process.
Yeah.
If you're working internationally, it's going to be a different process.
Yeah. Having that, being nimble
Yeah.
with the big picture, right? We don't want to be signing ourselves up for too much risk, but sometimes we get so down into the weeds of doing things correctly that we end up shooting ourselves in the foot that way. Yeah.
Mhm.
John, it's been so amazing to have you here on the podcast today. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up?
No, just a thank you to you. I think that having people come on and talk about their experiences, good, bad, indifferent, it creates an opening for people to think about what they're doing and to think, hey, maybe that's something I could do differently. So,
Mm.
just an open invitation to anyone in your audience. Reach out to me if you want to have a conversation. jwh@word.work is my email. And I'm always happy to have a conversation with people to see how we may be able to help each other out.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, John, for that offer. We'll put your email in the show notes if that's okay.
That is fine.
That's a very generous offer. And thank you again for being here and for all of the insights you've shared. Like you said, it's a great combination of very tangible strategies that you shared today and also the bigger picture. So thank you very much.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you soon. Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melisaliberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.